it is going to be the new literacy. Neuralink successfully planted a Neuralink into someone's brain. There's massive progress happening in being able to communicate within the digital space without using our prefrontal lobe cortex, which is where we generate language. The next Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world are going to be coming from this continent. Those are the people you want to do it, because when you give those people money, when you give those people opportunity, when you give those people resources, that's when we build a continent.
You're the CEO of an innovation summit, which is very much focused on the tech space and also the startup space, I would say as well. How do you get from chemical engineering to where you are now?
There's so many young people that are trying to figure themselves out. And the answer that came from me was,
we are back on the C.Cast. This is episode 17, and today I'm sitting with Buntu Majaja, CEO of the South African Innovation Summit. And I want to get a little bit more into your background, because the way that we met was actually in our building. We stay in the same building, and every time I walk into one of the workspaces, I always see Buntu there on the grind, doing his thing, and also looking clean. Like... always looking fresh and clean every time. And I don't know how do you do that? I really want to know how you can work so hard but also just look so good all the time. Like, how is it possible?
I appreciate it, man. If I knew as well, I think I'd probably productize it.
Oh yeah.
But I appreciate it. Sometimes I think it's just a passion for aesthetics, just a passion for how things look. Sometimes people, especially like the team, and like we're in the company, like they say, dude, you're taking it too far. Like when I'm looking like design, how we design things or how we design slides and so on. Sometimes I do take it a bit too far, like in terms of how things should look, but maybe just an appreciation.
Do you know what? I like as you're speaking out, the thing that's coming to my mind is attention to detail. Like that keen eye. I call it eagle eye. You want to have an eagle eye kind of focus on things. And I think that's very evident through your style. Like you focus on the little things, those things, because ultimately at the end of the day, a lot of people, they don't want to focus on the little things because, they think it's just a small element, right? What lands up happening is all of these small things compound to make a bigger difference at the end of the day.
It's a system. It's just now that we're actually on it, I think about even everything as a system. So like the wardrobe is a system of core things and then things that you shift around it, or like core colors, things you shift around it, core items, things you shift around it. But fundamentally, I think, like you're saying, if you don't take care of the system, which is made up, of it's a big engine when you're looking at it, but there's a bolt there or a small gear, which can make a big difference, a 1%, 2% difference when you want to, gear up. And I think, maybe that applies to everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the way that you mentioned the bolt, because it's a perfect segue into the question that I want to ask you, because you have a background in engineering.
That's true.
Now, you're the CEO of an innovation summit, which is very much focused on the tech space and also the startup space, I would say as well. How do you get from chemical engineering to where you are now?
I love this question, brother, because there's so many young people that are trying to figure themselves out, and Africa's young. And we all trying to figure like this thing out. And the thing is, it's changing so fast. Like what you're thinking for now, by the time you start your degree, by the time you end, completely different story. Opportunity scape has changed. And the internet game has, of course, opened up a whole new flurry of careers that were never possible, that our lecturers have no clue about. And the AI game that's coming now is like about to 10x that, in my view. So I love reflecting on this, because I went into engineering thinking that I was going to be an engineer, PR eng, working in the factory, get a good job, get a good house, wife, kids, the whole shebang, which is fantastic. That's how we build the economy. However, that flipped for me in two ways quite fundamentally. The first one is how I grew up in Eastern Cape, rural Eastern Cape, valleys, sheep, cows, beautiful cold winters, mildly warm summers. And we were moving around there, and I ended up in the University of Pretoria. And when I got to the University of Pretoria, I think I saw, which was, the first metropolitan I was exposed to in my journey. I saw for the first time people on the corners, on the sides of the roads, on the streets that I felt had something changed, like different in my life. That could have been me. And I couldn't quite reconcile with that because I couldn't answer why I was studying chemical engineering and many of my peers, when I go home in December, aren't. And I had to ask myself that question over and over. I think one of the things that was trying to answer that question was our the first business idea or sort of entrepreneurial venture we tried, which was a platform to map out careers. So this is the second thing that really hit me on how we should be thinking about our careers, and for me, how I ended up thinking about mine. We went around the university interviewing our peers, undergrads mostly, asking three questions. What do you know why you're studying what you're studying? Do you know what kind of work you're going to do once you're done studying what you're studying? And do you want to do that work? And we found that 60 to 70% of young people either didn't know or didn't want to do what they were going to end up doing. And for me, this came down to, I don't need to discover myself, but I need to decide myself. And chemical engineering was no longer the answer to how now do I contribute to changing what I'm seeing in which was, for me, injustice, something that later on I've come to define as, a key part of my driving purpose. So I was then deciding that engineering is not going to be the solution. At the time, I still believe that entrepreneurship would be the only way. There's a multitude of ways now, but at the time I thought I have to go into business.
Okay.
So I went through a couple of ventures, startups during university time, all sorts of entrepreneurial, hustles here and there, and ended up still working in a factory. However, a year later, I then went into business school, went into consulting, and then I went one day into the office a couple years later, and I couldn't stand it anymore. And I actually walked out that day. Of course, I still put it in my notice and so on. But that day,
you're like, peace out,
right? And then since then I've been managing cash flows, managing pipelines, client pipelines, managing ideas, and managing myself, the enemy within. And the engineering degree itself, now looking back, was a tool on how to think.
I like that word how, because I think the degree and the means is the how, right? But then what's more important, because you can get the how, but you can still feel lost. And what's more important before you determine the how is determining the why. 100%. And I think you kind of alluded to it a bit, because you mentioned like you were walking in your childhood and you saw like a discrepancy. And we were talking about this in the previous episode, how in South Africa, it's weird because we're living in a duality. There's two South Africas that we are living in. And I'd say our why within JD Creations is, we always say we exist to connect Africa to the digital economy and the world to Africa. And the purpose of doing that is to uplift our continent in the global space, because we believe that Africa is a sleeping superpower. So how do we do that? Well, we need to first connect these two worlds. We need to make sure that this other world is able to catch up. And that's essential to making it happen. So that's our why. I would love to hear what your why is, and more importantly, how you got to that. Because like you said, a lot of young people, like Africa's got the youngest, biggest youth population in the world, but a lot of young people are struggling to figure out that why. So how did you find your why, and what is your why?
I feel that, man. I feel that deeply. Because with the why, you can manage any how.
Yes.
And you can achieve any what. And every day, the why remains the thing that wakes me up in the morning, the thing that gives me the strength to go beyond what I'm capable of and grow and take on challenges that I don't think I can take on. And so I somehow, as I mature and I grow in time, I find myself grateful to have in some way started figuring this out for me. What's the most important thing, at a relatively young age, because some people go to the grave without ever having had that conversation with themselves. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why should I keep doing this? And even though I wish I could have had that conversation sooner, my journey is my journey and your journey is your journey. And wherever you have that conversation is the perfect time for you. And for me, I think in some ways I was thrown into it in how there was like some level of loss, dysfunction in my life, personal life, early days of university. And at the same time, this reality I couldn't disclose. I go 2 kilometers outside of a pristine world-class university, and there's poverty, there is disease, there's lack, but there's still, of course, humanity. And humanity was like maybe in as a value in my family, or just even in the philosophy at the time. I just started picking up books across the board, the Bhagavad Gita, Buddha, Taoism, Immanuel Kant, Rene Descartes. I just started going into this stuff, and the answer that came for me was, the why won't find me. I need to decide what that why is. And in many ways, it never made sense at the time, but my gut feeling was saying, I need to try and contribute to making it easier for young people to be successful, to make this disparity of opportunity less violent and less so evident and blatant in our society. And it's what they call a wicked problem. It's ever evolving. When you try to attack it, it changes. It's always been there. You can never really solve it, but you can, of course, contribute it. And I think that's the most important. That's when now I see that's when you found your why, is when you can go to the grave ever chasing that reality. And at that time, that was just like, the thinking and the gut feeling. Over the last 10 years, I'd probably say that has now evolved to defining it as equalizing economic opportunities for young African people and the young children of the soil to be successful and to thrive. And I see that particularly in two ways. One is education, and not education in terms of, the books only. Yes, formal education is fundamental. However, I think there's an education of how we think, what we think about, and the exposure in itself. Just exposure and the human mind and how it processes that. Like some people travel to a whole new different place. You come back thinking completely different. You see a piece of art and it just changes something, it clicks something in you, or you hear something, that kind of exposure as well. So this, and I think that we can do more, and that we have an opportunity in Africa to take that, we're at the last frontier, to take that into a space where we can actually give that to people. I think in most places in the world, just don't have the young people and the impetus and the desire to I wouldn't say formalize it, but I think we're at the last frontier. I don't know what it would look like, but there's an education, a form of education that currently does not exist, that is going to exist in Africa, and it's going to change the game of learning for humanity. And the second thing I believe is entrepreneurship. And that, for me, is an economic expression of your life. Whatever you decide to do in your life and whatever drives you, how do you translate that into an economic journey in a way that, as a society at a mass scale, we are able to interact, create value, solve problems, and at the end of the day, improve livelihood and well-being for all. So entrepreneurship in its academic form is about new venture creation, innovation within existing ventures, etc. But I do think that every single one of us in whatever we do can be entrepreneurial and should be entrepreneurial. And that is actually the more humane thing to do, as opposed to being a button pusher or a wheel turner. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Highly respectable and honorable to get up, work, and get your stuff done. However, I do think that, that for the coming 1.25 billion people by 2050 in Africa, which is going to be the biggest growth in the world, there is a new flurry of how we will be creating value that hasn't been done yet, and I hope that I contribute to making that more possible.
You touched on traveling to a place and it changing your perspective, and you've also touched on education and us innovating new ways to do education. So as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the current system and how old it is. It's designed to create button pushers and wheel turners, right? Which is why we find most people going into that kind of path, because when you look at the entrepreneurship side of it, right? I mean, me personally, right? I would tell my parents about me going this entrepreneurship group, and my response would be, I don't know, are you sure you want to do that? Like, it's going to be hard. Like, I wasn't encouraged to do it. I was kind of actually the opposite. I was told to go a different direction. No, go do the internship, go the corporate routes, blah, blah, blah. So for me, I studied BCom Information Systems and Economics. That's my background. And I always tell people that I left varsity without any friends, because while my friends were studying, or my peers were studying in the library, I was in the streets of Braamfontein shooting fashion shoots with thrift stores. So I would come back to our group projects and stuff, and they would be like, what is this guy doing? Like, is he serious? Like, I don't know if I want this guy in my group. Like, that's the kind of interaction that I had, because most other people were going more of the traditional step-by-step approach, right? And that journey, I'm so glad that I did that, because through doing that, I also managed to find my why. I knew that I didn't want to be in the corporate space. I wanted to take a risk, because I believe that I'm put on this earth, and the reason why I'm here is legacy, because I'm going to one day die. We're all going to pass away at some point. And at that point, the only thing that's left is the impact that you've had. So if you want to transcend time, it's more about the impact that you can have on this world in order to continue living. And I didn't know what I wanted to do at the time, but I knew that I was good at content, and I was good at creative thinking and problem solving and tech. So through that experience, I think when I look back, and this is a word that keeps coming up in my mind as I have these conversations, is audacity, being audacious. And I think a lot of people, especially in the African context, aren't kind of encouraged to be audacious, because you want to take it, and it's understandable, you want to take the safest routes that's going to be most likely to get you out of the position that you're in. Going the entrepreneurship route is risky, it's hard, like you have to be audacious to do that. And I think this conversation is so important, because I'm sure there's someone listening to this that has the courage to do that. And that's why I really wanted to hear about your story today.
I love that. I love that. But I really want to touch on two things: self-awareness that you highlighted, and then the other one is on being entrepreneurial. I love this, the audaciousness, and being bold, and to an extent being authentic. I think on the self-awareness, we cannot understate how important it is for one to talk to themselves. Yes, it looks crazy, but you got to talk to yourself and understand yourself and map your reality to who you are. The thought on this, particularly on entrepreneurship, is that as much as our parents said, like, don't go and be entrepreneurs, and I don't think everyone should start a business. Everyone should be, the founder and driving the business. But I do think everyone can be entrepreneurial, and whether you're an academic, whether you're in corporate, or whether you're in a startup and SMME, and for the people particularly that would be starting the business, and this is that infinity value creation, the 0 to 1, according to the Peter Thiel theory and so on. When you create something starting from your mind, you're jotting down the concept, jotting down the business model. 3 years later, it's operating, and the upside is infinite.
Yeah,
and at the same time, I think that journey is by far one of the most, if not the most, difficult things that you can do, at least the most difficult thing I've ever done. And you hear that time and time again from other entrepreneurs. I remember I was watching the video by the NVIDIA CEO, I forget his name, but his company just did like skyrocketing stock since the AI boom, as they're using those chips. But he said, they asked him, hey, so like, what would you give advice to a starting entrepreneur?
don't do it.
He said, I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't. What I thought it took, and what it actually took, is completely worlds apart. And I would understand why our parents, much as they said that, maybe they weren't coming from that point of view, but I thought that saying that is then going to spark the people that really need to do it. Because if we have people, which is some of the issues that I have when it comes to how we building the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa, is that if we have people that aren't really going to do it, even when you tell them don't do it. You want the people that are going to do it when you tell them don't do it. It's a mistake. you're going to regret it. I wouldn't do it again. Those are the people you want to do it, because when you give those people money, when you give those people opportunity, when you give those people resources, that's when we build the continent. But what we sometimes end up doing is sort of lowering, I won't say lowering the bar, but sure, like creating a space where inefficient use of how we want to develop the ecosystem, how capital is deployed, and so on is done. So I do think that more entrepreneurs should talk about how the journey really is, and that will spark the entrepreneurs that you need to do it now. Because if you think you're ever doing it, you need to start now. Just take one step, and that will come to also particularly in Africa, like where the ecosystem is growing. It's really risky. There's probably no riskier place to start a business in the world than here in this continent. They say, if you can make it here, make it in Lagos, make it in Johannesburg, Nairobi, you can make it anywhere in the world. Because there's a context that you're operating in. And there is this framework called, the Ikigai framework, which looks at 4 things. And you can look this up, but basically what it's trying to say is that when you're navigating through your dream, there's things that you got to understand about the marketplace, there's things you got to understand about your capabilities, there's things you got to understand about what you enjoy and your passion. And all of these things coming together will increase the likelihood of your success. And self-awareness as an entrepreneur in Africa, I think, is the most important element. I remember spending, hours and hours doing like free tests online, my psychoanalysis. I went for psychometrics. Even to this day, I will pay a professional to come and tell me about my leadership style. They gotta come and tell me about my mindfulness, state of mindfulness, because these are the tools that I truly have in my disposal, in my control. I can't control whether my clients can sign the deal or not, can't control whether the investors are going to pull the plug or not, but me understanding myself, a number one. So I love that self-awareness, and I'd encourage just everybody, talk to yourself, learn yourself, whatever you can. Talk to your friend. Hey, just tell me, just like gloves off, anything, right? Like truly, what do you think about when I said this? Or what do you think about when I do this? And sometimes those are the most precious gifts that you can get from your friends.
Yeah. Be audacious, be curious, because that curiosity, that need to figure it out, to learn, is what forces you down that rabbit hole. And not even that, even like you mentioned, when you tell people not to do it, the ones that are going to do it are the ones that are curious. I want to see, I want to find out, to the point where you can't not do it. You have to try. And when I think about your history, right, you were audacious yourself from what I can see. You spoke now about being an entrepreneur in Africa. Someone said, I can't remember who it was, but someone said entrepreneurs in Africa have to do 10 times the amount of work with 1/10 of the resources. Now, that's not necessarily the case all around the globe. And earlier you mentioned sometimes you need to go somewhere to learn something new, to change and shift your perspective. From what I can see about your life is you weren't always operating in the South African context. There's a portion where you had gone abroad and you wanted to find out more about the world in which we live. Tell me more about that experience.
Love that. Love the cue, because that's all about curiosity. And I'm I suppose having curiosity on humanity, having curiosity on psychology, on people, will always also be an opportunity to learn about yourself, especially when it's people that are very different from you, have different worldviews, experiences, cultural practices, and so on. So I suppose that where it was always curious. I'd gotten my passport at like 16. Like the first year I could get my passport, I went and got it. I didn't know where I was going. Like I had no plan. There's no ticket. Be prepared. But I knew that anytime now, I need to go see like this world. And the first place I went to was Brazil, and it was on a program for, back when I still wanted to be an engineer, do solar engineering and solve clean tech problems and so on. And when I landed there and interacted with people, different language, obviously, people somewhat look differently, but things look the same. Some things look the same, some things felt the same. And I think I learned so much about, even when I remember going downtown in Sao Paulo, I was like, yo man, this is Joburg. This is like, this is what I'm used to. This is Juta Street. This is Juta Street. And I might get rushed like any time now, like I'm the foreigner now in Joburg. And I felt at that time that this is so exhilarating. Like this is so expansive.
So what was one of the things that you learned from these travels?
Sure. Yeah. So when I think it's two things. When I look back from the experience in Sao Paulo, I think then I went again to Costa Rica, and those are the first two places I went. And since then, of maybe 20, 30 countries, I'm not sure, humanity is one of the things that always sticks with me, is that we people all around want the same things. And how enriching it is. And in some ways, there's 8 billion people, but how enriching it is that every single experience and journey is unique. We all want the same things, but everyone pretty much unique, very unique, and it's miraculous. I think the other thing that now probably goes more closer to my purpose is how the African child all over the world is treated more or less the same. And it's not the same as everyone else. And I thought that's in Africa. But whether it's in India, Japan, Russia, or Sao Paulo at that time, never thought about it, I realized, hey, there's something wrong with the story. I don't know what it is. But at least for me, I thought it's important that how I navigate my life in this world, I don't contribute to that story. And even beyond that, how do I contribute to creating a new story about how the future African child can go anywhere in the world and look eye to eye to any other human being.
And not only that, be respected.
Exactly.
It's possible to shift that narrative, but it, like you said, it starts with you.
All I can do is how I navigate my life. All I can do is how I treat the people stamping the passport. All I can do is about how I articulate my thoughts. All I can do is about how I show up in the boardrooms, and how I can share a message of this. There is something wrong here, and you can do something about it. And I think I really want to encourage myself and all young Africans to step up, to be more than what the world thinks you are.
That's such a powerful message. And you touched on it earlier, right? It starts with us as individuals. And when we all work together with a joint vision, anything is possible. But it requires that work, and it requires, like you mentioned also with the Ikigai concept, the opportunity. Where does the opportunity lie? So you alluded a little bit about it earlier. You feel like AI has presented a huge opportunity. What is that opportunity, and how do we capitalize on that opportunity?
Love that. I was actually in Melville earlier today, and I was just looking at I love to get like this hat, for example, from a charity shop or like a thrift shop, and that's where you get the best stuff.
Yeah, no one else is gonna be wearing that stuff. Like,
and it's they don't make clothes like they used to, like 10 years, 20 years ago these days. But that's a different story. The point is, the gentleman there recognized me. He says, heard me on radio talking about AI, and we're just talking, about what the opportunity is like. And then and as I'm walking away, he's like, "Hey man, I want to invest in AI. How do I do that?" I've obviously very far from being an AI expert, but from my purview, considering startups on the continent, considering the time I've spent, doing basic coding, and the people that are talking about that around me, investors and the news, the discourse in the public space, in the adoption of the technology. My view is it is going to be the new literacy. Already digital literacy is reading and writing, but being able to interact with the AI as a tool, like a pen in the digital space, it's going to be the same thing. And I said to the guy, "Hey man, what I'll do is I'd invest in myself. I would pick up a book. I'd do a 3-month boot camp on AI, and the world of opportunities would open for you. Because I might have ideas such as in terms of how it's going to impact the workspace, such as how it's we've seen it's already eating away in a matrix of complexity to simplicity and repetitiveness to novelty matrix.
Creativity.
Yeah, being creative. The jobs that are repetitive and simple, those ones have already started being eaten up by the Industrial Revolution and automation. What it's going for now are the ones that are repetitive as well as novel. So that's like the analyst at a consulting job. That's like the first stage, or the bookkeeper for the accountant, the paralegal for the lawyer. These jobs are somewhat, you got to go and research a little bit about the lawyer will ask you, what are the 10 cases that are similar to this? And you got to go and research that, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, some thinking, some novelty, but it's repetitive. Every time there's sort of a process to it. And automation started eating up what is not novel, but what AI is going to start eating up is what is even novel. And so I may say that's the kind of impact, but no one really knows. And you might go and see what this technology is capable of and have an idea that no one has ever thought of because of your unique experiences and your unique context and circumstances And, we've got, at least in my belief, the next Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world are going to be coming from this continent when we start really learning and immersing ourselves and valuing AI as part of standard education. And so I think this is like the fundamental impact that it needs to shift for us as an individual. Get involved in it, and you will define and write the story of what's possible for it. Because as much as it's going to eat those jobs, it's also going to create like 10x more.
So the first question that I was going to ask you is, what does that mean for us? Because a lot of people will listen to what you're saying and be like, if it's eating these jobs, what am I going to do? But I think you kind of answered it. It's going to create new opportunities to innovate and create new jobs, which is super, super exciting. But I still want to ask you the same question, but just from a different angle. What does it mean for us? And when I say what it means for us, I mean as Africans. And the reason why I'm asking this question is I'm being a little bit selfish here, because previous episode, we were chatting with Mpumelelo Mkhize. He's our developer within JD Creations, is helping us develop a tool called Prompt Pulse. Now, in the AI space, there are currently a few limitations that I can identify that are challenges that need to be overcome. The first is contextual issues, right? When you're using AI, it needs to understand your context, and our context is unique to every individual. So feeding that context into the AI is a challenge. We need to look at data, how we capture data, and how we feed that into the AI. So that's the first challenge. The second is a communication issue, because the quality of results that you can get from AI as it currently exists is directly proportional to your ability to communicate and give good instructions. Not everyone has the opportunity to go to university and learn how to answer a question in a test. Not everyone has the opportunity to lead a team and give people instructions on tasks that they need to do. Not everyone has the opportunity to learn English. How do we navigate that as young people, and what does that mean for us as Africans? And then lastly, I would say the last limitation is when it comes to that opportunity, it's opened up Pandora's box of opportunity. Sometimes I feel like a kid in a candy store, because we're developing this tool, but I don't know what problem to solve, because there's endless problems and this tool can solve all of these problems. So what problem, how do you decide what problem it is? And how do you also remain aware of what AI can do to solve these problems? So now the way that I think about that is we all operate in different domains of expertise. I operate in the digital space. So when it comes to content production, website development, anything that involves a digital ecosystem, I'm well aware of that because that's what I do. There's a lawyer out there who's operating in the law space who would be able to develop AI tools that solve law problems a lot better than what I do. But I'll never be aware of what that AI is able to solve in the law arena because I'm not in that space. So there's a disconnect between our different domains of expertise, and we're not aware of what is actually possible with all this AI being available. So what we're doing is we're trying to create a tool that solves all of these problems. And I won't get into it now. I'll probably tell you a little bit offline, but we started to develop that. But the reason why I'm asking this question is because what does it mean for us in Africa? Because there's still this gap that exists, right? If I don't know how to use Word or to communicate in English, how do I use AI? So that's what I'm asking is like, what does this mean for us?
I feel that, and the work that you are doing, I think, is part of the answer. Is us each getting involved in writing that story. And in short, I have like absolutely no clue. This is definitely the biggest challenge of our time in tech and as entrepreneurs. I think that there are a couple, principles per se that are worth thinking about. I sort of want to make a reference here to one of the things that Jeff Bezos has been told to say to his executives, or that he does as his ethos is, they always try to answer problems or work on things that can never be wrong. Like, he can't imagine customers saying they want something a little bit more expensive from Amazon. Always want, if it can be cheaper, that's great. So always work on cutting cost. Or he can't imagine someone saying, "Hey Jeff, I love Amazon, but but it got delivered a bit too fast." Like, no one's gonna say that. Like, people always want it delivered as soon as possible. So there's these principles, and I think in the tech space, coming to AI, another like the frontier of innovation often is actually at a physics or a hardware or like deep down the value chain. And I think one of the things that we want to think about, where should we be focusing, is appreciate that computing, digital tech, is fundamentally dependent on processing capability. And that's the microchip. And that's how many transistors they can fit into the microchip. That's why our phone can do what, many times what the early computers did. And often we don't see that, sometimes when an innovation, a big innovation happens, like we did with the mobile phone, it's because the chips got small enough and cheap enough to be able to, not like with Uber, for example, to not only geolocate, but also calculate in real time, a fare across a multitude of variables, and also process like this good user interface and so on. Like all of this stuff, heavy processing, which a couple years, 2-3 years earlier before that may not have been possible. And I think when it comes to AI in particular, in terms of data, there is a big processing issue, data issue. It cost $200 million for Microsoft to put up the servers that they did last year. Do we have those in Africa? Are we investing $200 million in servers? Is that even a priority? Is that even on our list? And that means that this data that we are generating has no data sovereignty. So now we need to start talking about, potentially, in my belief, blockchain technology, because that means that every single device on the continent can become part of the server. And if we think about building $200 million databases, that's not going to happen. We got people to feed, we got industries to build, but people are buying the fastest mobile phone growing and penetration region in the world. And so if we have a decentralized server, maybe we can start solving some of these data issues. But again, the limitation is how much is each phone going to be able to process. But we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, you've identified the problem to solve.
And when we talk about communication, and this one will go, probably many years more into the future. But as you saw recently, the Neuralink, one of Elon Musk's companies, has successfully planted a Neuralink into someone's brain, and they've been showing it through animals and even other people, but this person's now actually able to interact with it a little bit more, but also it's solving the problem that they intended. So like there's massive progress happening in being able to communicate within the digital space without using our prefrontal lobe or cortex, which is where we generate language. So it's going to be a completely different wave of communication. Now, are we going to, bring that? Are we going to have the next generation of people hooked up into computers, talking into them? I don't know. Is that going to be ethical? Are there going to be challenges? Sure, if the servers and all the devices aren't developed for national security or etc., that might be a problem. But I do think that we are again moving in a direction that I don't think is going to be stopped, which is where this brain and the brain in here is going to become much, much closer. And I suppose my view is that we really need to be open to those things. And when we are thinking about how to solve particularly like the two challenges you raise now within AI, data and communication, how do we as a society create opportunities for those things to happen in a safer way, faster way, healthier way, more humane way, etc., and not be a neo-colonization story?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. A lot of what you're talking about now is about innovation. And my response to that would be, in Africa, we don't have as many resources available for innovation. And we look at young startups, there's not much support for these startups, especially coming from government. And like you mentioned, the education thing is a huge problem because we're focusing on basic issues. We're focusing on water and electricity. There's not much resource for innovation at this point in time. So I think a lot of the people that are in the entrepreneurial space, that question of how do we transform education really needs to be answered. I also love what you said about the language. I think the language challenge will be solved quite soon, whether it be from a Neuralink perspective or from an AR perspective. Because if we look at the progress that's been made with, for example, virtual reality headsets, there's a huge opportunity for us to start tapping into translation tools and software, because what we find is a lot of the times the software is able to develop a lot faster than the hardware. So I think once the hardware catches up, I think that language barrier will become a lot less of an issue. But something that you raised that I never thought about was the data sovereignty element, because at the end of the day, we're not the ones in control. And when you talk about that, I think of the idea of a platform business, right? Amazon Web Services is a platform business. It serves as the bedrock for many other organizations. And because it serves at the bedrock, there's a certain level of control and power that comes into the picture there. So what I think we should be doing as young entrepreneurs is be thinking about how do we as African build our own platform businesses on which other people can build businesses, and that can empower those people to build those businesses and create jobs and opportunities for people. So if I were an investor right now, I would be investing in these platform businesses because that's what's going to serve as the bedrock for these new businesses that are coming up. And there's a huge opportunity there because we've got this market that's emerging, and the more and more connected that we get, the more and more we're going to be able to tap into that market, and those resources can become more centralized to gain more level of sovereignty in the economic space. So I'm so excited for us to continue this conversation and to work more on like how do we solve these problems. But we are coming a bit to the end of the discussion. So I wanted to just ask you, like, we've touched on your past, we've touched a little bit on the present, and a little bit on the future, but I want to bring it back to you, right? What are you working on right now to solve the problems that we are speaking about? And how can someone who's listening to this get involved in that?
That's superb. Thanks for that. I think these things be very close to my heart. And when you talk about a platform, that's what every day I'm waking up to build, is a platform where together with the broad team and community of people that we work with, can have entrepreneurs coming in on one side and coming out on the other side and staying within the ecosystem, but to thrive. And this is primarily in three ways. The first one is a flagship event. This is where people come together, share discussions, like these, where they can inspire new ideas. Then they can take decisions on those ideas. And hopefully those decisions mean that deals will be happening, businesses will be growing, sales will be happening, investments will be happening. And we want to have the right people who, as many of them, who are thinking about these same issues and in many ways solving them. in the same space for an entire week. And we do this annually. This year is 16th until the 20th of September in Cape Town. But we also host other similar conversations, conference-wise, like in partnership with the University of Technology, Tshwane University of Technology, TUT, where they host a conversation that's closer to the education part, and particularly for young people, think about the future of work. So that's the future of work dialogue, and very, I think, poignant and good foresight from the Tshwane University of Technology to want to ask ourselves, how do we do what we're doing better, and how do we all do that, differently for our context? Because like you said, what does it mean for us? AI is here, IoT is here. What does it mean for us here in Africa? And so that's an African university having that conversation at a large scale. And that's in October, 18th till the 19th of October. I think, you can Google X Innovation Summit or Future of Work Dialogue, and there's many ways to get involved. But if we take some of these issues that we've raised and problems in technology adoption themselves and in the use themselves, they are in themselves ideas for startups and entrepreneurs. And these are people that are working on these things and opportunities for people to not only build wealth, but solve fundamental problems that can change the trajectory of the continent. And we need more and more of those people trying and failing, but it also means many more succeeding. And in that journey, there is mentorship required. There is coaching required. There's investment conversations required. There is acceleration. There's incubation. And so in that platform, that's one of the second things that we do, which is run an acceleration program across different areas, from commercialization, getting ready for investment, and negotiating with investors, and just cleaning up your pitch. Brilliant. Most entrepreneurs I meet are brilliant, but their package is the difference between the investor saying, come back to me in 3 months, or let's do this.
I need to do this now. I think the difference between that is people make decisions based off how they feel. You can have the most amazing idea, but if you don't communicate it in a way that the person trusts you,
it's gotta land, and they feel it, because when you work with an investor, you working with a partner. This is borderline marriage. And no one marries like
some random person they met on the side of the road. No,
with a sketchy pitch. But I mean, it's a second element that we in some ways trying to plug and continue to see growing results in that. And then the third one is just a community, like ongoing meetings, ongoing events. How do you find each other? Hey, do you know someone who has this problem? Search them out in the database, or have an introduction, or have a conversation, a webinar, or just a meeting on issues in automotive tech, for example. And so these are the things that, when you go on to techtribeaccelerator.com or innovationsummit.co.za, you'll find, and what I appreciate is how all of these things are possible through partnerships in the ecosystem, and that we need to accelerate how we're growing. Yes, the ecosystem is growing, opportunities are there, but I think we need to accelerate that. And for us to accelerate that, we need to do things differently. And part of that is embracing an era of collaboration, and co-creating value even in a resource scarce environment. I think be competitive. Yes, there's competitors. We compete in this space, but shared vision, and this is, a value that we continue to see have multiplier effects, is how do we also co-create and collaborate. So I also want to appreciate, the investors out there. I want to appreciate the development agencies, the heads of innovation in corporate, and the professors on blockchain, all of them playing a role in this space and coming together in different ways, is how we will accelerate the solutions. And we want to play a role in having that platform that allows those things to happen, those interactions to happen.
Awesome stuff. All right, before we wrap up, favorite tech gadget you cannot live without?
I want to say my phone, but probably I'd be more devastated if my laptop disappeared.
Most memorable place you've ever traveled to?
Well, I've got 3. Unfortunately, the top shifted my mind at the top of it. One, Sao Paulo, other one, Tokyo, other one, Moscow.
Early bird or night owl?
Naturally night owl, but by discipline, early bird.
Buntu, thank you so much for coming through. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I feel like we really, really need to do another episode. So we hope to see you again for part 2. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to join our community, please link with us on WhatsApp. You can scan the QR code and join the WhatsApp group. We would also like to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please share this with a friend. If you know someone that might stand to gain something from this episode, please do share it with them and join the community. We hope to have you on the podcast at some point as well. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Peace.